anytime I'm ever around early childhood educators, I'm just so struck at how kind-hearted they are. And so I think we can trust that. And it's good for your child to be around people who don't talk like you, who don't look like you, who don't do things the way that you do, because they're learning about all the different kinds of people in the world. And so that's a good thing.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is Maintaining Connection with Your Children as a Working Parent with Ann McKitrick. Ann is a parenting expert and coach, child development specialist, and teacher trainer. She is host of Parenting in the First 3 Years podcast and founder of Nurtured Noggins. Over her 30-plus year career, Ann has cared for countless babies in her child development programs, plus 3 kids of her own, 3 grandbabies, and 5 foster babies. Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is so lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I listened to that your calling for children, your love of children, started very young in your life, I would say as a child yourself.
Yes. You know, when I was 7 years old, my mother went to work. I was the 4th of 5 kids. And that was kind of unusual. I'm an older person. And so most of our moms didn't work full time. And my mom went to work, and she became the first director of the child care center that opened at our church. And that was kind of a big deal too. It wasn't as common. And so I grew up in those elementary, junior high years, going to work with her every day in the summer. And I would just go and initially, kind of played with the kids and was one of the kids. But then as I got older, I really began to observe the children. And this was back in the day when privacy wasn't quite as much a big of a deal. And my mom would let me read the files. She would let me read the files on the children. And I loved reading what the parents would say about their children, about just, their personality, their quirks, what works at home, and then watch the kids in the school and just kind of think about it and compare it. And I think that's probably where it was birthed. And I just always have loved observing and talking with and interacting with children and their parents, but particularly the children.
Now, was that the time, those early years, did you know you wanted to be in child education and childcare and or become a mother? I know that some people have that feeling well before others expect them to.
Right. Yeah, I really wanted to be a mother. And I that's really, I didn't have a lot of ambition as a teenager. And so I just went to college. And I just took courses I was interested in. I took things like child development and things like that, along with all my others. And eventually, it just kind of worked into a degree in consumer sciences and education. And then I just fell into a graduate program where I got this amazing degree in human development and family studies, and got to work in these fabulous laboratory on-campus schools with infants and their parents. It was just delightful. It was such a gift to just fall into something that I loved so much. And then I just kind of continued with that.
So I actually think you just told everyone the recipe for how to do higher education for those that move on, and that is to follow your interest. Like, the idea you said, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. There's so much pressure these days for young adults and students to know what they want to do for quote the rest of their lives at a very young
Mm-hmm.
age, which I don't think is
Mm-hmm.
is a very realistic expectation. So to for you to follow your interests and take classes that were of interest to you and pursue those, I would say this is the ideal model for finding joy and finding work that doesn't feel like work most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I think that there's good reasons for secondary schools to kind of steer kids in a way, but then in a sense, it doesn't broaden their experience, and it kind of, I think it
Hmm.
can be limiting. Um, Kids have a lot of opportunity that I didn't have when I was in high school to make those
Hmm.
kind of decisions. But I do have some pretty strong feelings about kids graduating high school with college degrees.
Yes,
I
yes,
think their
yes.
brains need a little bit longer to develop before they have to enter the work world.
Uh, yes. And it seems like brains are, I don't know if they're taking any longer to develop these days, but there's a lot of environmental and socio-historical reasons that um, the old you're 18 and you're ready to go, it doesn't seem to hold up much anymore.
I don't think so.
No, no. For all you parents out there that have your kids who are returning to home after college or still staying with you, that's very common these days for lots of different
Exactly.
reasons.
Exactly.
Okay, but that's at the end of the childhood journey. Your specialty and love and passion is at the beginning. So how did you end up focusing in on those first 3 years?
Um, well, I mentioned the graduate degree. That was an internship where I worked at a sweet little school called the Infant Development Center. And we took children from 0 to 36 months. And so my research was around that. My livelihood while I was in college was there. And then when I graduated, it just kind of was a natural thing for me to go seek to be an infant teacher in a college lab school. And so that's what I did. I got to just take care of babies and care for their parents. And then I was able to teach courses and then train teachers on how to do the same. And so I think that the true love of babies really came from my mom and my family. We used to be so happy when the baby would wake up from their nap and jump to go get them out of the crib. So yeah, I think the combination of those things.
What has changed in your 30 years in the business of our understanding, if anything, about what these little humans need and the most optimal ways to nurture them in healthy ways?
That's a really great question. I don't think that children have changed. It's what we know about their brains that has changed, and
Hmm.
um, and understanding, like some of the practices that maybe were common 20 years ago, 30 years ago, just are not now. Say, for example, back to sleep. The whole SIDS thing taught us, and the
Hmm.
research around SIDS has taught us that babies in the first 4 months, particularly, especially at a school, they have to be laid down on their back instead of their tummy. Even though
Hmm.
I always put my babies on their tummy because they slept better that way, and
Hmm.
and so that's one example. But I think that the whole idea of responsive care has come to the forefront in a way that it's just talked about a lot more than maybe it was 30 years ago.
Hmm. And when you talk about responsive care, what does that mean for us?
It means really paying close attention to the cues that your children are giving you and responding them to those in a way that meets their needs. instead of
Mm-hmm.
kind of squashing the cry. Instead, respond to the cry and see what's behind the cry and doing something about it,
Yes, the cry as communication as opposed
Yes,
to a nuisance,
right,
annoying, and
right.
granted, many sleep deprived parents out there, so it can get really stressful when you
Of
haven't
course.
slept a lot and your baby's fussing and crying and you don't know why and you don't know how to make them stop. So, how do you counsel your young parents? And you do so on your podcast as well. It's just filled with wisdom, your wisdom and techniques. What do you say to these new parents that are? It's not only is it all new, but it can often be very overwhelming.
hmm I think that there's a bit of a feeling that you have to do it all by yourself, and I think that especially, in the last few years with the pandemic, it just kind of perpetuated this feeling of isolation that new parents have with their baby. And it also heightened our fear of germs and having somebody in the house or bringing outside germs in or all of that kind of stuff. So you feel like you have to create this protective haven for your baby, and you do, but also you need someone to come in and help you, and you need help. You need to allow people to help you. Now,
Hmm.
someone might be listening and say, it's a great idea, lady, but I don't have anybody to help. And
Right,
and
right.
and that's when, gosh, you just have to learn how to communicate it and find the help. There's lots of professionals, but also just even communicating to your friends and family. I really could use your support. I need at least a
Hmm.
Zoom call with you in these hard times, and connection
Hmm.
with somebody who can give you the support, the emotional support that you need, even if they can't come give you physical support.
I have read about the pressure on mothers, especially new mothers, with this idea that because one has carried a child, all of a sudden there's this expectation they should know exactly what to do and
hmm
are fully responsible for every aspect of a child's life and outcome as a person. And it's this unspoken thing that I like us to dispel here because it just seems there's so much pressure or can be so much pressure.
hmm you don't just magically know things just because you've gone through labor and delivery. You have to learn about your baby as time goes on. And, I think there's a real need to listen to the professionals who are telling you things, to listen to your aunties and some of the folks who are giving you advice. Don't shun it, take it with a grain of salt, but listen to what people are saying, because nobody's going to tell you something. Well, I guess maybe they could, but they have a good heart. The intentions are good. They want to help you. They see.
Hmm.
But I think that understanding that it takes a good long time to become a parent and to go through the paradigm switch that it takes to to go through this transition. I think it takes probably nearly a
Hmm.
year for your head to get around the
Hmm.
whole idea that this person is 100% responsible, reliant on me for every little thing. And
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
huge responsibility, and I don't know that we really understand it until that baby is in our arms.
And then, as you said, with all the feedback we get from doctors and family members and grandparents, you get a lot of feedback about what other
hmm
people think. And it can really, like you said, we got to take some of it in, but it also can take us off of our own center and our own knowing. And as you
Absolutely.
empower, right, you empower your parents that you work with, like, your child best, like, right. Like,
hmm
and to trust that
hmm
in them.
Right. Right. And I think maybe just a kind of a practical tip would be select 1 to 2 people that you're going to take as your trusted advisors,
Mm,
and go to them. And what I did as a young mom, even though I had all this experience with babies, when I became a parent, I was just as flabbergasted as anybody else because you just don't even know how it is until you do it. And but I had a friend who was like 6 months ahead, and she was somebody that I trusted, and she was one that I went to. She and my mom were my 2 people.
mm,
But
mm.
yeah, I think identifying somebody that you trust, somebody that you've watched and you admire, you connect with them. I think that's a good way to do it. And I really think
That
it's a
is
good
so,
idea
yeah,
to kind of stay away from all of the voices. There's a lot of voices out
yes,
there, and you have to
yes.
filter.
And for those of you who can't see Anne, she's saying it with a smile and with wisdom on her face. And I do know it takes a while for us to have the courage to listen to ourselves and to tamp down all of the other voices and then our own critical voices as well.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's a process.
It is.
So, as you have noted in your writings and podcasts, there is absolutely nothing easy about being a working parent. You now have more responsibilities and you have to entrust others to care for your child and give up that role temporarily, but also for often a substantial amount of the week in doing so. And there's a lots of emotions and feelings and concerns that go with that.
Oh, absolutely. It's grievous to leave your baby the first time when you have to go back to work. I I feel it, and I know that it's really, really hard. Um, I think there's things that you can do, and one of them is to really carefully select where you put your child, and to make sure that you have um, a real good sense when you meet these people that you trust them. The trust is really, really important. And depending on where you live, it can take you may have to start looking a year. You might even have to start looking the minute you get pregnant or even beforehand. It just depends on where you are. But I know that my niece, she's here in the Houston area, and when she had her baby, they went around looking. She went to all of the top recommended by her friends and all that stuff, and those were not the ones that were the ticket for them. They found one school where they really connected with the infant teacher, with the director of the program, and they felt good, they felt safe. And I think that feeling is really, really important. And
Hmm.
it's not always a
Hmm.
school too. It's oftentimes other settings for childcare.
What are some of the ways that you recommend people do this research beyond the like? There is the feeling, right? There is trusting
Hmm.
your gut feeling, our
Hmm.
other brain, the gut. What are sort of that checklist, if it's a short list even, that you would recommend people look into when making such a big decision?
Well, I think probably one of the very first things I would do is I would check the state records. All
Mm,
in licensing infractions are public knowledge, and so go and look at them. I just did a training on minimum standards in Texas with a group of infant teachers this morning, and
mm,
I mean the book is this thick of the
mm.
things that they have to
Yeah.
do to keep children safe. It's a huge thing taking care of other people's kids, and so see where their violations are. And every child care center is probably going to have some violations, but look at what those violations are. And
Hmm.
then that doesn't mean that that's not the school for you, but it does mean when you visit with them, you say, I noticed when I looked online that this is what I saw. Can you please help me understand? And then let
Hmm.
them tell you that we've made all these changes and it's good now. It might very well be good. But I think that's probably one of the best places to start. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, trying to drop in and see how things are. Just stop by for a visit, and a lot. It just all depends on the program whether or not they would allow you to just stop in and take a look.
Mm-hmm.
But if it feels very controlled, to me that would be a bit of a red flag. I would want an open door policy. Now, with
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
I know that there was not very much
Mm-hmm.
open door for quite a while, but I think that the doors are pretty open right now. And just the way that they welcome you in to see and present themselves, I think is really important. When you get down to the nitty gritty, I'd say when you walk in, listen, smell,
Mm-hmm.
look. You should hear noise. You should hear children crying and laughing and playing and talking. If it's quiet, either they have really thick walls and thick glass, or somebody's shushing those kids too much. And
Mm-hmm.
if it smells clean and fresh, that's a good sign. If things are tidy, and just all the things that you would look for to know that this is a place that is well cared for, that somebody's
Mm-hmm.
on the watch and taking care of
Mm-hmm.
all of the details. And also I would listen for the way teachers are talking to children. That's a biggie.
Yes. 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 And even when you can't quite put your finger on it, but you have a feeling, you got to
Mm-hmm.
trust your feeling, right? We don't always have
Absolutely.
to have this concrete example or
Mm-mm.
reason.
Right.
Trust yourself.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the ways that you recommend to the parents that you work with of how to maintain the bond, strengthen the bond, keep developing their bond when they're away from their kids up to 40 hours a week while working?
Mm-hmm. You know, um, I think there's one thing that you can do is just try to put a little padding in your schedule so that when you drop off and when you pick up, maybe one or the other, because on both ends might be too much, but just allow a little linger time. There's a real big difference between here she is, here's her backpack, bye bye, I'll see you later, and kind of a walk down the hall, stepping in, looking at what they've got out on the tables, making sure your kid is engaged, and then giving them a big wave goodbye, and you're going to have a great day. There's a real big difference in the way that feels. And I understand that, sometimes you don't have the time for that. But at the end of the day, too, when you come to pick up your child and they're so engaged in playing that they don't want to leave, or they look at you and start crying, it's not because they don't want to go with you. It just means that they're having fun, and that's a good thing. And
Mm,
if you can just go in and sit with them and talk about what they're doing, or watch them and then talk to them when they come out, try just maintaining a positive attitude with drop off and pick up. And so that's one. Another one is to if the school allows it, if they are a school that does this kind of communication, text, ask for pictures throughout the day, find out what's happening. Some schools even have cameras where you can watch your kid. I know that might be a huge distraction at work, but if you could pop in and just see, on the nanny cam what's going on, that might be nice. Um, notes in the diaper bag, notes in the lunchbox, photograph books made of pictures of the family so that your baby can have pictures of you while you're gone, while you're separated. All of those connection points I think are good. But I also think that one thing that parents can do is it's almost like an unspoken, but it is spoken, communicate to their child, you are fully capable of managing this school that I have selected especially for you. And I know that you, as a 2-year-old, can go in there and play and make friends, and you can love Miss Susan just as much as I I do as your mom, and just communicate confidence in your child's ability to do well and to learn and to play and to make friends and gain autonomy. I think that that's a really I think that's really helpful for kids.
Hmm. And that's making me think also of, I mean, all the research that shows how healthy for their development it is for kids to be around lots of other people, right? To have these
Hmm.
socialization experiences, and for us to think about it as this is something that is good for them, as opposed to that guilt that we can feel, and particularly mothers, like the shaming about, oh, your child's in daycare. I mean, this stuff still happens, right? Where
I
people
know,
get
yeah.
judged, and so I think you're here to tell everyone that it's simply, it's not true, right? That there is no guilt in this. There is no shame in this. This is real life, and a
Hmm.
huge percentage of young kids are in childcare. That's how it works in our society these days.
Right, right. Yeah, and the people who are working at the child care center are doing it because they love the work. They wouldn't
Hmm.
choose that job if they didn't want to be there. And so um, they are a very diverse group of people. The people who work with our children in this country are so fascinating. And I would say that, and I can say this with full confidence, they are really nice people, you know? And
Hmm.
anytime I'm ever around early childhood educators, I'm just so struck at how kind-hearted they are. And so I think we can trust that. And it's good for your child to be around people who don't talk like you, who don't look like you, who don't do things the way that you do, because they're learning about all the different kinds of people in the world. And so that's a good thing.
So, how, in your experience, how does one, and seeing your mom do this when you were a young child, how does one manage the responsibilities of work and family without totally losing oneself? Right? Where's there any room for parent who is working and raising their family?
Hmm. I think that working parents really have to be very mindful about finding the nooks and crannies in their day to take care of themselves, because there's not very many of them. Um,
Hmm.
it's real hard to peel a 2-year-old off your leg and leave them crying at school and then get in your car and hop on a call with somebody on the way to work, or knowing that you
Hmm.
have a meeting as soon as you get there. There's a real
Yeah.
head switch there that has to happen. And if it's possible to just give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to switch, you know, to do something with your head, whatever works for you, um, to get over there. I think that just planning for that, even if you have to leave the house a little bit earlier to allow
Hmm.
yourself that time. I suggest things like listening to comedy on the radio, or, listening to fun things, listening to beautiful music, listening to things that build you up, or, just spending that time to make the
Yes.
switch. And then if you happen to get a lunch break, to make it a time where maybe you're doing something a little bit different that feeds your soul, whatever that might be. Maybe it's knitting
Hmm.
something, or whatever it is that you love. Um, but yeah, I think that there's just a period of time when your kids are little where you don't have much time to yourself. But the time
No.
that you do get, you just have to make the very best of
Hmm.
it.
Hmm. And when you said, like dropping off a crying child and going for a meeting, it brings up lots of personal memories. Our kids, all had very challenging transitions going to daycare. There was always they were kind of known as the Velcro kids. Like, you had to peel them off, and they were very upset. And so there is the whole continuum of the kids that just smile and they run into their place, or they happily go to another caregiver when they're young enough. And then there are the other kids that don't like it, have whether it's an anxious disposition or some separation anxiety. And man, we know from firsthand experience that takes a toll. Like, talk about, you feel bad anyways that you're, wanting to spend more time with your child. And then when they're so upset and reaching for you and having to be peeled off you, that doesn't help.
No, it feels really, really bad.
Yeah.
I used to time it. I used to literally watch my watch, and I would call the parent and say, it took about 2.5 minutes for her to calm down and play happily in the classroom.
That's so important. That's so important. Yeah.
It's really, really, I mean, some people might say it's a show. I don't think it's a show. I think it's that child's true emotion. They do not want to leave you. They love you. They don't want to be with anybody but you. And that just, to me, that just shows you're doing a great job. And if you could even change what you're saying to yourself, I feel horrible. I'm a terrible parent because I've left my screaming kid at childcare. Switch it over to, man, we have a great relationship. She doesn't even want to say goodbye, even though there's all those great things to do. And children just do that. I don't know why they do it, but they sure do.
They do. A lot of them do. And I know this is one of these things for all of us to have compassion towards others, is that even though we don't might not have that experience, is to have compassion for others who were watching go through it without judgment. Because it's just so easy to assign blame to someone or something for, that's why your child's like this, or that's why, and if you just do this. And that's the last thing that parent wants to hear or feel in these difficult, at times heart-wrenching moments.
Absolutely. And okay, so I'm going to go back and revisit the whole, how do you find a child care center? You need to find a staff that is supportive and will see you through that, who is going to respond to that in a positive way, and support you through it. There's a real difference even in the way that child care folks respond to that, and you want to find the ones who are going to be nice about it.
Yes. And I know we benefited from that with our kids, and I know that made a huge difference to get that phone call to say, hey, they're all right. They're okay. They're playing right now. It took this long, or in some cases they went to sleep and then they woke up and they were fine.
Right.
But it really, for peace of mind as you're going through the day, because you had to, and this is the thing of these obstacles of that working parents have, to have the emotional load of worrying about your child and how they're doing while you're trying to do your own job. That is a lot.
Right. It is. It is.
So what are these obstacles? What would you say are the obstacles that you see working parents commonly experience, and then some ideas for dealing with them?
Well, I think getting out the door in the morning and starting the day is probably a really pretty big obstacle that can catch you off guard. Oftentimes you don't know what your 2-year-old's going to do, and they might throw a screaming Mimi, and it sets everything back 15 minutes and messes up your day. And so I think anything that you can do to prepare the child for what's happening, and also preparing physically. I mean, if you can put things in the car the night before and just all you have to do is walk out, I think that's helpful. So getting out the door, I think, is a really big obstacle. Of course, the drop off. And then at the end of the day, everybody's tired, and that can be a tricky time too, because you're tired, and so your patience might not be quite as long, and your child is tired and hungry, and doesn't have much left in their rope before they need to go to bed, and so you feel like your time at the end of the day is not as good and positive and wonderful as you would like for it to be, and that can make you feel bad as well. So I think just knowing that that your kid had a happy day of play, that, if things aren't all perfectly birds flying everywhere, in the morning and evening, that it's okay. But watching your kid and being responsive and trying to respond to whatever it is that they are communicating to you, I think is key. And
Mm-hmm.
and and just doing the best you can, to get through those crazy hours. Um,
Yes.
I think another obstacle is just feeling like you have no time at all. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's all of the things that people say, and I don't need to repeat them. But if you can just put your devices down and maybe do
Mm-hmm.
something that is not quite so brainless, and
Mm-hmm.
even that's what you feel like you need, maybe a bubble bath would be better, or maybe a glass of wine with your partner and talking about what happened at work today might be better than just both sitting and scrolling. Just making the effort to try to do something like that, to revive your spirit a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
or
You know, when you
go to bed earlier.
yeah, go to bed earlier, but and that so this is that dilemma. Go to bed earlier, and yet that for many is the only windows of time that you have
I
um
know.
to yourself, because you said you might be feeling like you don't have any time for yourself. And we know that uh, parents of young kids and all kids often feel like that. And it's not only a feeling, it's actually often true,
it's
right? It's like
it's
it's a
truth.
feeling and it's reality. It's total truth. So
Yeah.
yeah, that dilemma of that nighttime where a time alone for you with yourself, time with your partner. It's this give and take or cost benefit analysis of, gosh, I really need sleep, but oh gosh, I really just need to sit here in peace and quiet, or I just really need to
Hmm.
connect with my partner.
Or I need to do the grocery order so they'll deliver it tomorrow. It's all those
Yeah, yeah,
things that you
yeah,
need to do.
yeah. Right.
um, what my daughter and her partner do is they take turns giving each other a night off each week. So
Mm,
one night a week, they each do the whole bedtime thing with all three kids. And the other person, like my daughter oftentimes will go work in the yard because she loves to do that, but she just is off from
mm-hmm,
the tasks. And I think that's a
mm-hmm,
really good way to do it, because it doesn't cost them anything. It's a little bit of
mm-hmm,
effort when it's your turn, but you also know that, well, tomorrow night it's my turn. And so it makes it a little bit better. And so that's one way to do it, and if you've got a family member, grandparent, somebody that you could set up a regular time to get some help in the home and give you some time away, I think is really good. Scheduling
mm-hmm,
time with friends, of
mm-hmm,
course, is good. Even if it's with your neighbors, where you just sit outside with your monitors going, and you
mm-hmm,
can do
mm-hmm.
something like that. Um, yeah, but there's a lot of push pull feelings
Yes, yes.
with
Some of
parenting
our,
little ones.
you just reminded me of some of our happiest memories. Were with our neighbors across the street, and we had this big tree in the middle of the street, and we were in it's kind of a place where a lot of cars didn't come, just if you happen to live on our street. And was this giant oak tree in the middle of the street, and we would put a makeshift little like Italian restaurant looking thing up with an umbrella. And we'd both have our baby monitors with the other couple, and right on the table, we were both 20 feet away from our house. And it
Right.
was this feeling of being free and having a night out while also parenting. So
Yeah.
that was a happy memory you triggered, like the trying to be creative with your neighbors to get that
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that, that's really one of the keys, is just to look around and look at what resources do I have available to me, and how can I take advantage of these resources? How can I meet my needs with what I have here in front of me? A lot of
Mhm.
childcare centers offer, a night out for parents. That would be a great thing to do, or coordinate with some friends. I'll take yours this week, you take mine that week. There are
Mhm.
lots and lots of ways to be creative with this.
Yes. Yes, I think that's the key, is that being creative. And with understanding the realities of the situation, it is hard, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you got to be
It
really
is hard.
creative because there's not a lot of time. But it's just being mindful of that
Mm-hmm.
need.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you're talking about the relationship with the importance of a relationship with the daycare providers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend parents cultivate that relationship? Are there do's and don'ts of things to do to make that connection happen as well as possible?
I think it's as with any interaction with another person, you just get to know them, learn about what they are interested in and what do they love and what do they do when they go home? What do they do on the weekends? If they're willing to share it. And like I can think back of, I mean, parents used to come into my room and tell me their stories, and I loved hearing their baby stories. I loved their babies, not as much as they did, but I loved their babies. And I loved hearing the funny things they did on the weekend. And they loved hearing the funny things they did during the day. And so just exchanging stories about your kid with this person who's spending all this time with them, it's a really good thing to do. It not only does it connect you and help you know them, but it also, you are modeling for your child that you trust the school and the school trusts you, and y'all are a community, and it is this is their world. Their world is their school and their world is their home, and they need to be connected. And the way that you
Hmm.
connect is by getting to know the teachers. If you see a new staff person, there's a lot of new staff in childcare. There's a lot of turnover.
Hmm.
And when you see a new face, introduce yourself. I mean,
Hmm.
just get to know people. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that you can do. And that ties back
Hmm.
to the whole linger, drop off and pick up.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
where those real
Yeah.
conversations happen. And
Hmm.
if the teacher is unavailable, then I would ask, when are you available? When is a good time for us to talk? Because I want to know you. I want to know
Hmm.
you, and I want you to know me, and cultivate it that way.
There's a statement on your website that really spoke to me because it's completely aligned with this show and having awareness. And so here's your statement: the joy and challenge of knowing your child intersects with how well you know yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that when you become a parent, there's a lot of things that you don't know about yourself because they're going to come out when you become a parent. And
Hmm.
you might learn all kinds of new things, but it might bring up, a lot of stuff from your childhood. It might bring up a lot of insecurities, and just learning that about yourself and dealing with it, I think, is really important. But also, you may not even know how capable you are of loving another being as much as you love your child. I think that's probably one of the things that is the most lovely surprises about being a parent. It's just this welling of love that you have for this kid. And that really is where the joy is. And then, of course, every stage of parenting presents its new thing. And
Hmm.
so for me personally, it was parenting adolescence it was very hard. It triggered up a lot of stuff for me. I learned a lot about myself
Hmm.
during that time. And
Hmm.
it just wasn't comfortable for me. Some people are real comfortable with teenagers, and I'm comfortable with little kids. And
Hmm.
I didn't know what to do with those kids when they were cocooning in their room and wouldn't talk to me, and just all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
yeah, and then letting go, when kids need to launch as young adults. I think that's another time when you really have a lot of self reflection to do. And, where is your identity? You've just spent the last 20 years identifying as the parent of this person. You're still their parent, but they really don't need you so much anymore. So what's left
Yeah.
of you? and
Right.
figuring all that out.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
journey. It's a good journey. It's a journey.
It is a journey, and it doesn't end. They are
No.
my our experience is our kids continue to be our teachers in ways
Mm-hmm.
that are sometimes welcome and sometimes unwelcome. Like that you
Right.
wouldn't choose it, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
all really important. Um,
Absolutely.
I think for continued growth.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Anne, it's time for the parent footprint moment question. Here we go.
Okay.
Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual or as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on yourself, your kids, and or those you love.
Okay. I've been thinking about this. I knew this question was coming. And I have a lot of answers to it, actually. But I'm going to tell you this one story. When our kids were like in fourth, sixth, and eighth grade, they were about 2 years apart, three
Mhm.
kids. Um, I was dropping my son, the sixth grader, off at some school function. And I saw this friend in the parking lot. We just had this exchange. I said, "What's new?" She says, "Oh, I'm going to go I'm going to go hike the Grand Canyon in 3 weeks. You want to go?" And I went, "Yeah." And so I decided, kind of a pretty uncalculated decision. I thought because I could run 3 miles that I could hike a rim to rim
Mhm.
hike with a 50-pound
Mhm.
backpack, and no big deal. But anyways,
No big.
I had never seen the Grand Canyon. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I knew it was an adventure. I knew it was going to be a challenge, and I needed to do it. I was that many years
You were
into
in it.
parenting. I needed to do it. I was scared to death, and when I saw the canyon, I was really scared. And and I did it. And there was only three of us on the hike, and the other two were, I would call them, much more athletic women than me, and they had been training. They knew they were going to go for much longer than than I did. Anyways, I did that hike, and every step of the way, I gained a little bit more confidence and a little, I worked through the fear, and really coming up on the North Rim. That's when I had the worst fears because it was just so stinking steep. And I am scared to death of heights. And why I agreed to do
Mm.
it, I don't even know. But when we got to the end, um, I had done it. And I think what it did for me is I realized that I could do pretty much anything I put my mind to, and that I could do very hard things. And I showed my kids in that very important age, junior high,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
you have to be courageous and do things that scare you to death. And that
Mm.
when you do, you stand up stronger, and you gain a confidence that you will not gain if you don't work through these fears. And
Mm.
for a really long time, I mean, he hasn't said it to me in a while, but for a long time, my husband would say, anytime I got scared of something, and I can get scared, he will say, "Ann, you hiked the Grand Canyon." And I'm like, "I did." I did do that. And
I can
so
do this then. Yeah.
I can do that. I did that. But I think that what that showed my kids is working through the fears, but also I think for my daughters, they probably were a little empowered by my empowerment of that event.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that my son also learned about an empowered woman through that event. I think it was a
Mhm.
life learning thing for all of us. And so my kids saw me change. They saw me grow in ways that, that were really interesting. They probably didn't make any sense of it until they were many, many years later. But I think even looking back at it now, I would really actually love to have that conversation with them. I think I will, about, what did they observe and what did they feel about me doing that thing? Or were they just mad because I was gone for a week? That was another part of it, was they had to manage themselves while I was gone. And another thing that happened out of that trip is, I always like nature, but wow, the rocks inside the Grand Canyon it was overwhelmingly beautiful. And I have become an avid rock collector since then. And my son, and I have this shared love of rocks. And so, yeah, rocks are my thing now. So.
All this because you said yes. Right? You said yes. And I do get that you needed a break at that point in your parenting journey. However, even when people need a break, they often feel guilty for doing anything for themselves. And you did something for yourself, which not only tremendously impacted your life, but also your kids seeing you do that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that empowering and at times treacherous moment in the Grand Canyon. And tell everyone about your podcast, about Nurtured Noggins, and where they can find you.
Okay. Well, my podcast is Parenting in the First 3 Years, and I'm on episode 84. So I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and I really do try to focus on child development. There's some mom stuff in there, parenting stuff too, but I like to talk about child development. I think it's the most fascinating subject, and so that's primarily what it is about. Nurtured Noggins is a result of my daughter and I starting a mommy blog about 8 years ago, and she was going to, make this thing happen. And she did a beautiful job of creating this website and writing some blog posts, and then had her second child and said, kind of lost my zip on this. I think I'd like to stop. And I just loved it and kept the name. I thought it was a cute name, Nurtured Noggins, and I kept it. But I was doing my teacher training, and still do that. And so then I went to check on that little website because I had to pay for the URL, and she had gone viral on how to play with your 0 to 3 month old. What do you do with your 3 to 6 month old? What activities do you need for a 6 to 9 month old? And I thought, well, hey, I think people are interested in that. And so I kind of pivoted my attention over to really parent education over teacher education. And so that's what I'm doing now. I do group coaching for moms that is all about success principles for themselves, empowering themselves, and then also taking those same principles and teaching them to their kids in developmentally appropriate ways, whether their child is early, middle, adolescent, or young adult. And then I work with people one-to-one. And so you can find me, Nurtured Noggins, anything, Facebook, Instagram, nurturednoggins.com, and at nurturednoggins.com. So I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to talk.
Awesome. And it is a great name. Nurtured Noggins is a great name. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ann. Thank you for sharing your love of this topic and for your love of children. It exudes from you. It exudes from your website, from your podcast. And so everyone go check both the podcast, Parenting in the First 3 Years, and Nurtured Noggins for resources. And please share this with all of the people you know who have young children, new parents, soon to be parents, because as those of you know who've had these kids, this is a whole new venture when we set out to raise these little human beings.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been so fun to talk to you.
Thank you all for listening, for your 5-star reviews, for sharing this episode with your friends and bringing amazing people to our wonderful community. Do your best to be that person you want your child to become, and ask yourself the guiding question I ask myself each day: What footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummerman, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.